Good morning. Welcome to worship at St. Paul's United Church in Paris, Ontario for Sunday, June the 28th, 2020. My name is Michael Schuberg and I'm standing in for Reverend Sarah Grady today as she's feeling a little bit under the weather. It's a pleasure to be with you. I just want to recognize that St. Paul's United Church is on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Neutral Peoples. We give thanks for their stewardship of the land and honor their presence and commit to continuing to steward the land for all peoples. Our Christ candle is lit. We are grateful for the light of Christ amongst us, and even though we're online, may it spread out and be in your home and in your daily lives. So join us for worship. May the Spirit of Christ move amongst you in all the places that you are.
Teach me, God, to wonder. Teach me, God, to see. Let your world of beauty capture me. Praise to you be given. Love for you be lived. Life be celebrated, joy you give. Let me, God, be open. Let me loving be. Let your world of people speak to me. Praise to you be given. Love for you be lived. Life be celebrated, joy you give. Let me, God, be ready. Let me be awake. In your world of loving, my place take. Praise to you be given. Love for you be lived. Life be celebrated, joy you give. Teach me, God, to know you, hear you when you speak, see you in my neighbor when we meet. Praise to you be given, love for you be lived. Life be celebrated, joy you give.
Today's scripture passage is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verses 27 to 38. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you would do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. The words of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Here are the words of Reverend Sarah Grady, her sermon for today that I am reading for you. Let these words sink in. Let these words offer meaning to you. That is my prayer today. The Reverend Barb Lundblad tells a story one day many years ago when she was driving past a church in New York City and stopped at a red light. This meant she had some time to read the church sign. The sermon for the coming Sunday was posted in big red letters on the church bulletin board. It read, "Following Jesus is loving and practical." For some reason, the sign made her feel resentful and angry. She says, "I thought to myself, I don't think so." In her mind, following Jesus was perhaps loving, but it surely wasn't very practical. In her mind, she began a mental list of all the impractical things Jesus called his followers to do. But just then the light turned green and the car behind her started honking. So she never got to finish the argument with herself, just to be clear. To finish her story, she said, "I've wondered ever since that day what the minister said on that Sunday morning." And for her, if she ever decided to take up the argument again, she thinks she would turn back to today's gospel reading. Jesus' words in Luke chapter 6, "Love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you." To Barb Lundblad, these aren't practical words to live by, and I tend to agree. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Is this supposed to be realistic? Are we supposed to follow the directions now in the year 2020? Surely these were directions meant for the time that Jesus was living. If someone takes away all my goods, how am I supposed to give to everyone who begs from me? It doesn't make sense. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Well, now that's a bit better. That sounds a lot more practical, like something you might see or have seen on a poster in a school hallway or a Sunday school room. Now that makes sense. I'm sure you have come to know the label for these words just as I was taught them, the Golden Rule. And in fact, they are not unique to Jesus. They are found not only in Luke and in Matthew, but in the writings of Homer and Seneca and Philo. In fact, there is some variation of this rule found amongst most religions and cultures of the world. This is the kind of wisdom we learned in kindergarten when our teacher told us to treat other people the way that we would like to be treated, or our parents and grandparents when they reminded us when we were arguing. Sometimes it's tempting to boil down the Bible to one verse like this one. It's a verse that everyone can understand, and it sounds like practical wisdom about getting along in the world. But it's not possible to boil the Bible down to one verse, even if it is a great one. If we pull the Golden Rule out of this chapter as a summary of everything Jesus said, it's likely that we'll miss out on most of what Jesus said. We have to go back to where Jesus began. He began with these words, "Love your enemies." He says it not only once, but repeats it again a few verses later. Love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Thus the Golden Rule applies, even when we sense that someone won't treat us the way we would like to be treated. And this is the tricky part, and the seemingly impractical part of this teaching I think Reverend Barb Lundblad was getting at. Jesus' words about turning the other cheek and giving up your shirt along with your coat seem demeaning in the context of who he is speaking to. It is likely that Jesus was speaking here to the victims rather than the victimizers, to the oppressed rather than their oppressors. But Jesus isn't calling victims to roll over and play dead. However, It's very hard for us to see that because it does sound like Jesus is telling his victims to be quiet, to keep taking it. New Testament scholar Walter Wink works primarily with Matthew's version of this story, but the same insights can be applied to Jesus' words here in Luke. Strange as it may seem to us, Walter Wink sees Jesus' words as a form of non-violence resistance to oppression. Now, this is tricky because we have come to know something about the we have to know something about the culture in which Jesus lived. In the culture of first century Palestine, a person's left hand was used for what we might call, bathroom functions. I know it's not pleasant to think about this, but it is meant that you would never strike a person with your left hand. If you were superior to another person, you would strike them with the back of your right hand, never with the palm of your hand, for that would mean you'd see them as an equal. So now this is the picture Jesus is painting. If someone strikes you on your cheek, it will most likely be with the back of their hand, because Jesus is talking to victims. If the person were to turn their face to the side, this would force the oppressor to see them as an equal, for even oppressor wouldn't use his left hand. Some things simply weren't done. Jesus wants us to see an almost comical situation here. The oppressor's hand begins to swing, but is caught in midair because he doesn't want to treat the person as an equal by hitting them with an open palm. Clear as mud? Thanks, Walter Wink. The same humorous resistance comes in giving up your shirt when your oppressor asks for your coat. Now, this isn't a case of giving an old coat to the winter coat drive. Jesus is talking about something completely different here. It's likely that someone asks for your coat in repayment of a debt. You owe your oppressor something, and since you have no land and very little money, your oppressor asks for your coat. Now, there were very clear restrictions regarding the repayments of debts. You could not leave a debtor naked at sundown, no matter what he or she owed. It simply was not to be done. It was against every sense of decency and good order. So, Jesus sets up another strategy of resistance. If they ask for your coat, give them your shirt too. There, the person will be standing half naked. They'll be forced to deal with this before this new reality that has been set up. No, they say. I don't want your shirt. Put it back on. They might be so disarmed that they would return the coat as well. Jesus is not telling people to remain victims, but to find new ways of resisting evil. Love your enemies, Jesus said. Do good to those who hate you. In the last few weeks in our time and place have brought us to the forefront the need for an overhaul in our justice system in North America. The killing of innocent black people such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor by police officers has sparked an outrage across the United States that has spilled over into Canada and other parts of the world. Protests in the form of people marching, and sometimes rioting, are demanding for justice and equality. One of the most famous and important civil rights activists of our time was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Loving our enemies and doing good to those who hate you was the very ethic that moved Dr. King to kneel down with many brothers and sisters before water hoses and snarling dogs and angry mobs of people in his time of protest. Many people thought he was crazy. Only violence can fight violence, they told him. But the authorities and the oppressors didn't know what to do with this kind of resistance. They knew the power of violence. They knew the powerlessness of victims who knew their place. But this was something they hadn't seen before. Victims who refused to be victims. Victims who refused to fight back with violence. Victims who claimed their place and reshaped the battle completely. We have seen this modeled again in recent years, starting in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick of the San Francisco 49ers kneeled down during the national anthem of the United States of America as a form of nonviolent protest to the continued oppression of Black American people. Amongst what most people see as riots, there have been people of all races, creeds, and religions coming together to create non-violent protests in the form of kneeling silently, and have quite often been joined by law enforcement officers themselves during these protests. A form of non-violent protest by a few that has captured the attention of many. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Just when we have the golden rule memorized, Jesus reminds us that it is far deeper than how we treat our friends. It's far deeper than what we hope to receive. It's even different from treating others the way you hope to be treated. Jesus comes back again to the place where he began. But love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. It's not very practical, not in the sense of getting ahead in the world or doing what comes naturally. When I hear these words from Jesus now, I think about Matthew Shepard's mother. Do you remember Matthew Shepard? He was brutally beaten for being gay, beaten because one man felt he had made a pass at him. The man felt foolish and unmanly, and so he got a friend to help him put Matthew in his place. The two of them beat Matthew over and over again. They tied him to a fence on a country road and left him alone in the freezing night. By the time someone found him the next morning and got him to the hospital, there was no way to save him. Matthew Shepard died as hundreds stood in candlelight vigil outside the hospital. The two men who killed Matthew were arrested, tried, and convicted of a brutal hate crime. Proved guilty of first-degree murder, they were ordered to receive the death penalty by the state of Wyoming. But Matthew's mother came before the judge. She asked the judge to spare the lives of these guilty men. Who can understand what she had gone through in all the agonizing months leading up to the trial? What parent could sleep with the images of their beloved son tied to a fence, beaten and alone through the cold night? What sort of people could do this to another human being? Love your enemies, Jesus said. Do good to those who hate you. When I hear Jesus' words now, I think of Matthew's mother, her own life shaped by a gospel deeper than hatred, stronger than revenge. I do not know that I could do what she did. I would hope that I could. But I hold her in my heart as a witness to the power of the gospel, a love that is not practical, but one that can change the world. When I think of the state of the world today, when I think of how much hurt has been inflicted through wars and vengeance, senseless violence, and othering of people, it makes my heart ache. And yet I remain hopeful that the power of the gospel in this passage can help remind us of a love so great it can change not only the world, but us. The late Jack Layton may not have had a perfect track record in his years of political office, but in his final days, I believe he embodied with the gospel when he left the world with the gift of these words: My friends, love is better than anger. Hope is better than fear. Optimism is better than despair. So let us be loving, hopeful, and optimistic. Let us learn to love our neighbor and our enemy, and in doing so become the vision of God's world that we long to see. Thanks be to God. Amen. Brothers and sisters, as you go from this time together, may you be blessed, and may you be a blessing to those you meet in the world. Hear now the words of our choral closing that remind us of the love of God, that calls us to put God's love and our love for each other into action. Go now in peace.
We shall go